Have you ever wondered how East African athletes taper for races? Well, I'm in Kapchorwa in East Uganda. This is where our best long-distance Ugandan athletes live and train. And in this video, you'll follow Aziz Chebet, one of the athletes here, as he tapered for a half marathon race. Aziz was actually in the last video talking about running shoes. For those of you who don't know what a taper is, it's the 1 to 2 week period before a race. There's a lot of interest into what strategies, be it with training load, rest, diet, that best prepares the athlete for the race. And I'll cover all those in this video.
About 20 years, 4 years. I'm that to Jamie Bala half marathon. I'm considered like Qualabat half marathon. I was number 7.
So there's been comments about the language in the video. The local language here is Kupsabini. It's a Kalenjin dialect. English is also widely spoken. When I interview athletes, coaches, they have the choice. What you hear them speak is their preference. I don't know Kupsabini. I'm starting to pick up little bits. When they speak in it, I get friends to help with the translations. So Aziz is a promising athlete. He'd actually won the junior race of the first mountain race I attended back in October 2022. The mountain race here is a big deal. Some of the current stars like Jacob Kiplimo won it earlier in their career. This was his second half marathon race. As he said, he'd run his first one in Kasese, which is in West Uganda, near the Rwenzori Mountains. He'd run it this past August, and he performed really well. He ran a time of 64:39. And that equates to a race pace of 3 minutes, 4 seconds per kilometer. And we can keep this as a reference when comparing his workouts in his taper week.
Already ambashit already yogari kari sille mujar using program yokpa widiambo 1 hour mujawat 15 mujaw 30 minutes amna lagari silla are using.
Aziz doesn't keep note of his weekly mileage, but judging by his program of running around 15 to 20 kilometers per day and a once weekly long run of around 25 kilometers, he's averaging out a total weekly mileage of around 115 to 140 kilometers per week. The race was on Saturday, the 2nd of November, started following his taper from Tuesday, the 29th of October, so 4 days prior. So that Tuesday morning, he'd had a group speed session. It was 8 times 1 kilometer reps on a strip of tarmac road. There were 90-second recoveries in between each rep. And the coach instructed a controlled pace. He instructed that the men do each rep in 3 minutes, 5 seconds, which is near what we know Aziz's half marathon paces. That afternoon, he'd gone on a jog. He tells me for about 30 minutes. The athletes here will commonly refer to that second run of the day as a jog, and they'll tend to run this slower than their morning sessions, even on their easy days. From the Wednesday morning, I'd lent Aziz a GPS watch. His wasn't working very well. Just as a side note, there have been some comments on prior videos about how the athletes are performing so well without watches. This is say that that's not by choice. The athletes find them very useful. They do want them, but many struggle to afford them. It's great that a couple of viewers have reached out asking how they can donate the watches. It's something that I am looking into arranging, and I'll provide some details in a future video. So yes, on the Wednesday morning, we'd gone out to try and film Aziz on his easy run that morning, but there'd been a mix-up. We'd lost him en route. He'd ended up running around 25 minutes. We managed to catch him at the end though when he was doing his strides. I have done a video about the strides here. The athletes who commonly do this after their easy runs. If this is something you're not already doing in your training, I would suggest having a look into it. I've found them really useful in my training. On the Wednesday late afternoon, I'd actually joined Aziz on that jog. These are one of the few sessions I'm able to keep up with the athletes here. I made the mistake the first time I came out here of trying to keep up with them with more sessions, and I ended up overtraining. I learned a big lesson. So the Thursday was very interesting. Aziz told me that he intended to mainly rest that day, maybe go on an afternoon jog. But he called me early that morning saying that his coach had instructed that they do a speed workout. It was 400-meter reps on a strip of dirt road. They were doing 10 of them with 90-second recoveries in between. Aziz averaged this out at around 70 to 75 seconds per rep. The Thursday afternoon, he'd rested. On the Friday morning, he tells me he'd gone out for a 30-minute easy run. There was no log of this. There wasn't any electricity on the Thursday night to charge the watch. Unfortunately, that does commonly happen here. He did charge the watch on that Friday morning and recorded his last run before the race on the afternoon of the Friday, where he'd done again another easy run, just slightly over 20 minutes. So to summarize his training load, he'd reduced his easy running to about half the normal volume that he'd done, and he'd run them generally at a slower pace than he'd usually do on his easy runs. His easy run pace is usually around 4 minutes 30 per kilometer. He'd done 2 speed workouts in that lead up in the 4 days before the race. He'd run these around his race pace. However, the intervals were short, with a maximum of 1 kilometer.
Yomamia any competition le kimar resting ano mu jara singale ka 1 hour da gari competition le da bane gari competition le jara singan like 3 hours or 2 hours arwan di cekesan ang manonya jago kesel nganget sa kumi tene mangit sunyo ga nget ada besar wawa nonya ko benda sai training da competition.
So it's clear from his description that Aziz would typically rest more in the lead up to races. His daytime rest is referring to taking naps. In fact, I'd met one of the senior marathoners here, Philip Kiplimo, and asked him about what he does in terms of rest in the lead up to races, and this is what he had to say.
When you reach the last week of the competition, you must be totally free. Totally free, you must not be having even phone on. If you have other projects, you also stop any project of doing it. You have to be committed, focused to the race, so that at least that last week it can show the determination of somebody, because the way you have organized in the mind and you make sure so you are success in the race. You must be sleeping even daytime after training. You can go for just training. Even after training, you sleep. In the evening hours also, you finish training, you sleep. And then also in the evening hours, you have to rest before 9. Before 9, by 9 Saturday, you sleep. You cut everything, even WhatsApp, even other social medias, so that one shows that you are preparing for a race as somebody who wants to win a race.
Breakfast lai drungi nagi ago mboge and the line time le am gumnya da go baron ago sugma awa yue jamik mujam nyambo mujam sama candidate ago juice ago jago.
So in terms of his diet, Aziz never mentioned anything about carb loading in the lead up, but then again, we know his diet is quite rich in carbohydrates. I've done a video where I looked at the athlete diet here. Interestingly, the foods he mentions eating more nearer to races are actually quite rich in protein. The day before the race, lunch, he'd had matoke, which is a mashed plantain with rice, some fish, some greens. For dinner, he tells me he'd had posho, which the Kenyans refer to as ugali, and beans and greens. On the morning of the race, he'd only had juice, which makes you question whether he's having adequate fueling for the race. But then he runs his morning runs usually fasted, so this would have been an enhancement to what he usually has. So Saturday the 2nd November, race day, things were very exciting. The race was in Mbale, which is an hour's drive down the mountain from Kapchora. The race was actually organized by Joshua Cheptegei as part of the work he does to develop the community. Unfortunately, the footage I had from the day was limited. The event had a 10K that I was running. Jacob, who usually helps with filming, was part of the organizing group for the run, so he was quite tied up. Aziz did a 3-kilometer warm-up with some strides at the end. This is him at the start of the race. He'd had a great start to the race. He ran the first 5K in 14:37. He tells me he was up there with the leading group. He'd continued to run well, but unfortunately at the 10th kilometer, he developed some outer knee pain that meant he'd had to drop out. He did not finish the race. It wasn't the outcome expected. However, I still think this video is very useful. Why? Aziz would have used a similar method to prepare for races in the past, races in which he performed very well. It's the nature of the sport. You can have the perfect build-up and the race may not go to plan. It's about learning what you can from the experience, picking up the pieces, preparing for the next race. I guess the only thing that plays in my mind is the Thursday. He'd felt he needed rest. The coach had instructed a workout, sharpened things. Had he not done it, would things have been different? We'll never know. There were some great performances by athletes I've recently had on this channel. Rebecca came 3rd in the women's half marathon. Kevin came 5th in the men's half marathon. So that's an example of how an athlete here tapers for a race. I would be interested to know how that compares to your taper. Specifically, is there anything that you've learned from your experience that works best in your taper? Let me know, comment down below. I would like to thank Aziz for his participation in the video. I wish him the very best in his future career. I'll see you on the next video.